Yes. Okay. All right. All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Muhammad Sharif from Ummah Hacks. So today we'll be having Marwan and Amin, co-founders of Kadama, giving a short talk. So let me just start with the description. So the two fundamental questions every student entrepreneur asks is, how do I get started and how do I get funded? Because the Kadama founders had to avoid loans due to Islamic reasons, they knew they had to figure out a different financial strategy: hard work. Their drive to leap ahead as seniors in high school resulted in them landing summer internships, saving over 35K. But it didn't stop there. Anticipating the operational costs were going to surpass their initial investment, the team took advantage of multiple different avenues to raise a total of 70K, all while maintaining full ownership of the company. So I'm just going to give a short description of both Amin Shaykho and Marwan Al-Rakbi. So Amin Shaykho is the co-founder and CEO of the #1 student-led startup in Northwest, Kadama, which is a tutoring platform that connects students with tutors. He graduated from the University of Washington, Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science, and worked as a software engineer and product lead at companies like Apple and Boeing. Amin is also an avid speaker, giving talks about diversity, humanitarian, and educational challenges at TEDx events and universities. Marwan Al-Rakbi is a co-founder and COO. Marwan graduated from the University of Washington at the age of 20 with a business degree and worked at Prisonian Group, saving them over 100K in 2019 as part of his remit. As the operations officer at Kadama, Marwan works on the business side and management structure of Kadama. Marwan leads the interns teams and directly works with the CEO to achieve company milestones and decision making. All right. So now that we have their intros out of the way, Marwan and Amin Shaykho, if you guys would like to take the floor and begin your talk.
Awesome. Thank you, Mohammed. And thank you guys, everyone, for joining us today. We're really excited to share a little bit of our story, especially as like Muslim entrepreneurs, and the unique kind of like challenges that you'd face. Really quickly, my name is Amin, and I graduated from the University of Washington 2 years ago. I studied computer science, and past 2 years, I've been working on basically launching Kadam and kind of scaling it from an idea to an actual company. And at the same time, my day job is working at Apple.
My name is Marwan. I just recently graduated from the University of Washington Foster School of Business, and I currently work as a revenue analyst at Getty Images. So basically what Kadama is a platform that connects parents and students with tutors. We just recently launched our app. We're based in Seattle, so that's where we started, but right now our platform is being used by people across the country. We've been featured on multiple news articles. We've ranked top 21 on the App Store at one point, and we've gotten over $70,000 of funding without giving up any equity. So it was a crazy ride getting to this point. So let me explain to you how it all started. So Amin and I, we were both working summer internships. Amin was doing a software internship. I was doing an accounting internship. And at this time, we were still high school students just entering college. And we used to know each other for a couple of years. Like, we live in the same community. We're both Muslims. We see each other at the masjid. And the biggest thing we used to do is we used to play Xbox a lot, specifically Halo Reach, if you guys are familiar with that game. But it's been a few years since we last talked. And then I used to go every day after work. I used to rush to the local masjid to pray dhuhr. And one day I look behind me and I see Amin's praying. I'm like, oh, what? Like, and then we started killing. We're like, oh, hey, we realized we worked in the same area. And we just started talking again. We realized we had a lot of the same interests. We were both very passionate about entrepreneurship. We both had a lot of the same interests in the same mindset. We were like, I guess we always consider ourselves overachievers. We always wanted to do the best we could do, always go above and beyond just expectations set in general for people our age. So we were like, let's start thinking of something. What can we do? We both, he was software, I was business. It seemed like a good mix to do something. So we decided to go to lunch at this local gyro shop. And we sat down and we started thinking for hours and hours, what can we do? Idea after idea. And then Amin recalled a conversation he had with his brother about basically his mom, he wanted to go out, but his mom wouldn't let him because she said, you have to clean the kitchen first. And Amin was like, his brother discussed it. Oh, well, what if I could, get someone to come and clean up my kitchen, through an app or something. So Amin checked, he downloaded an app and saw the prices was like insane. It was like, what, like $70
yeah, like
for
80.
Yeah, it was insane, right? It was like, so we realized like, that's crazy. Like, what if we can make an app that's, something like that offers it at much more affordable rates. So, initially, just to explain, like we started off as multiple services, and now we're just focused on tutoring. But initially, that's how the idea started. We were like, let's do an app for any service. You needed your car repaired, you needed cleaning, tutoring, anything like that. That's what our app was. And yeah, that was the day Kadama was formed.
Yeah, and so basically, like as he said, we came up with this idea, but we were just high school students, and we've never created a project. We've never actually scaled anything from beyond just an idea. And we sat down. It was like late August of that summer, and we're like, okay, well, here's an idea, but what's going to prevent this idea from turning into like any other idea we created, where it just was an amazing idea. We talked about it, and then it just vanished. And so we started to do some research. How are we going to develop the app and how are we going to design the app were two questions we had. But on the other side of the spectrum, we're like, okay, wait, how are we going to finance this app? We were just like high school students, and we had no experience. I was studying computer science, but it was just like my first course. And so there was like a 2-month period where we were kind of going back between like, we don't even think this is possible. Maybe we're too young for this, to basically like getting re-inspired and finding basically new leads on how we're going to pursue this idea. And after doing a lot of research, we're like, okay, so this is kind of how we're going to design our app, and this is probably how we're going to actually develop the app. And the plan was we're going to like reach out to like contractors or something to kind of set up the app, and we would like lead them. And we did a lot of research, and it turns out that almost every single contracting agency is going to charge us somewhere between like, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. And we're like, whoa, this is impossible. Like, we're high school students. Where are we going to get the money from? And something that we had never thought about is like leveraging our summer internship money. Our whole plan was to use our summer internship to actually like pay for college. But then we came up with this idea. It was like, wait, we were getting this money from this internship. What if we actually leverage it to fund basically our entrepreneurship venture? And that's kind of the moment when it really got serious. It was like, are we going to take the chance and spend some of our initial money that we had been saving up for this idea? And once we made that leap of faith, that kind of basically promised us somewhere between $20,000 to $30,000 of total combined internship money that Marwan had and that I had for that one summer. And so now the next big project was like, how are we actually going to design this product? And after a lot of researching and conversation, it turns out that Marwan's dad had a connection with a company that would basically come in and kind of prototype our first MVP. And so you would think that now that we had this connection to create this first MVP, that basically the ball is rolling and everything's going to be successful and smooth. But the thing is, it actually didn't. In fact, working with that company there were a lot of cons in comparison to the pros. So we landed the consulting company, and then the next big thing from here was to actually kind of come up with the designs. And back then, again, like we had no software development experience, so we were relying on a consulting company, but they required designs. Initially, we thought they were going to come up with the designs, right? So we're like, what? We're going to have to do this? And you can see how oblivious we were to the topic of kind of like creating a product. And so Marwan and I sat back on a drawing board, and we started like sketching out different like frames of the app. Eventually, we kind of came up with like a flow that we thought was amazing. We actually thought that we had created gold and that this was going to be the next big idea. And so Marwan's dad, who actually like later ends up being like a mentor for us, was like a person who kind of bounced ideas with. And so we took these designs to his dad, and he looked at them and he was like, these are disgusting. Like, take them back. Like, this will never go anywhere. And so that like shattered us. Imagine working months on like an idea and then pitching it to somebody saying that this is never gonna work. And that was kind of the process with his dad for like a solid period, where we kind of like created iterations. We went to him and we had to go and fix them. And it was really challenging because every single iteration was like a new learning opportunity for us, and also required a lot of research and kind of basically familiarize ourselves with the concept. And eventually we kind of came up with this semi-acceptable design, which he approved and allowed us to kind of move on to actually get an MVP created. And the reason we spent so much time initially was because, if we make a mistake while developing it, the first iteration of the app, then we basically blew up all of the money we had saved. And so, yeah, we basically take those designs to the consulting company and we start working with them. So this was supposed to be like a 9-month period for, I guess, for like leadership that kind of knew what they were doing. But for us, because this was brand new, it actually extended to 2 years. those same 2 years were basically the 2 years Marwan and I were at the university. And so just like normal college students, you have a lot of responsibilities. And a lot of the times we would get sidetracked, things would get pushed forward. When working with those teams, they would come up with designs that basically did not meet any of the criteria that we wanted. And so that would basically delay us another month and another month. And we noticed that there were 3 core problems from doing this. The number one was that we did not have the proper communication skill to kind of make sure that everything was going on track. The second problem was that we just did not have enough design and like product experience to actually be able to ensure and foreshadow future problems. And the third one was kind of just like overall our ability to manage a project just wasn't at the level where it needed to be. And so we started off with monthly meetings. At the end of every single month, we would find that there's a whole new problem which would keep pushing us back and back and back. But the thing with Marwan and I was that we made sure that every time we faced a failure, we would learn from it so that it doesn't happen in the follow-up meeting. And so month over month, we eventually saw a decrease in basically like failures, and we started to grow and actually pivot away from them. And so that's where we kind of got to the last 6 months of this journey. In the last 6 months, we were starting to converge on an MVP that was actually working, and that was near basically the summer of 2018. And that's when we were ready to kind of basically get actual people to give us their feedback. In those 2 years, we initially came in oblivious to the concept of actually creating a product, to actually learning and growing, and at the end having something to actually present to users and get feedback. And so that's when we kind of set out and released our first beta.
And when we launched our beta, which was in June of 2018, that summer was a very good summer for us. We got tons of users in the Seattle area. We got featured on multiple news articles. We also had a internship program of 10 people who helped us in software development, web design, community outreach, and it was just a very, very good time period for us. But later during that year, stuff started to slow down a bit. We had the issue of, well, now we have this beta, right? How do we take this from, the beta product to the final product, and how do we scale? So, and that required more capital, more money. And also we just needed a bit more direction as well. So we started to think, okay, well, what can we do right now? And we looked at, through the University of Washington's business school, they had tons of programs for entrepreneurship. The first thing we did was we applied to the Dempsey Startup Competition. So this is a competition where you pitch your business, you write a business plan, and then you go through multiple rounds, and then the first place winners get $25,000. So we went through that. We went through the first round. We were selected top 36 out of 120 startups. Unfortunately, though, that's when our luck ran out for that competition. We didn't make it past the second round. We were all really, really sad, but we didn't let that keep us down, because right after that, literally just 2 months after, we got accepted into the Jones Foster Accelerator, which is a program that the University of Washington provided us a panel of expert mentors. So these guys are people who have, multi-million-dollar startups, who come from different backgrounds, such as lawyers and things like that. And it was just, they provide, and we basically convene with our panel, and we come up with goals that we will meet in every month for the next 6 months. And if we meet all these goals, we will get the grand prize of $25,000. And that's exactly what we did. So, in February 2020, we won $25,000 without giving up any equity. It was a straight up cash prize. And what we found even more valuable than we're just winning the cash was the guidance that we were given. This is where we made the biggest pivot, where we switched from having multiple services to just tutoring, because we were told, like, our reach was too big. We should just focus on one thing. And based on our beta, tutoring was the most in demand. And Amin and I could just relate to that the most as well. We like the idea, as students ourselves, we could easily relate, as a student, I'd want to make more money on the side. And we were very familiar with the tutoring space just from our own personal experience. So that was definitely the right choice for us to make. And that's helped us a lot as well. So yeah, talking, that panel, that advice and guidance we got has definitely set us up for success right now. And just a month after that, we entered a business plan competition called the Northwest Entrepreneurship Competition. and we won first place out of 130 teams, I believe, winning $10,000 and being ranked, getting the title of the #1 student-led technology startup in the Northwest.
Yeah.
So yeah, at the end, like total of funding we got from all that was $35,000.
And so kind of like the theme that we're trying to say here is that, so I hope, first of all, I hope that provided a good kind of like timeline of our journey. And initially, as you guys saw, like there were two big factors in the beginning. There was like experience and there was funding. And us as like Muslims, one of like the big challenges was, how do we avoid loans? How do we avoid, like basically getting like investment that was basically like, that had basically like interest on behind of it and stuff like a lot of loans and stuff like that. And so for a lot of people, like we know that we've talked to, sometimes it sets them back, and it's kind of like, okay, well, I can't really get into the space because I'm gonna have to do like interest, and that's like haram. And so what we had to do here is what we kind of had to like compensate for that, and compensate by spending a lot of time kind of learning and trying to excel at a really like rapid pace so that we can kind of stand out in other opportunities that will allow us to get financing interest free. And like you guys saw, we were high school students in the beginning, but I think our drive helped us like essentially accelerate our speed of learning. And while we did make a lot of mistakes, the key thing here was to avoid them. And so like the number one thing here is to anybody starting like a company, if like you're trying to avoid something, you want to compensate with something else so that you have something that stand out with. And what that allowed us to do was kind of get a lot of traction as college students and high school students, such that when we actually went and applied to the programs that the university had, we were competing against a lot of other like kind of like student startups. And so because of the traction we had received at that point, we were kind of able to kind of like elevate in terms of like traction, which made us stand out. And that was very significant to actually making it into the first round of that competition, but then also going into that accelerator. And so in addition to that, I think the key thing here is to kind of also be exploring different avenues that you can take beyond maybe traditional methods, because there are always going to be people, investors, organizations that want to help startups, especially student startups, whether just because they want to see them succeed or whether or not they believe in like the idea and they kind of want to be a part of it. And so definitely, while it may be intimidating at first to kind of have to like learn something from scratch and maybe even take a chance and spend a lot of time or even money on it, I think it's something that you should take if you're willing to put in that effort. And that's kind of what helped us basically land every single big milestone that we were able to basically land. And I think I kind of also want to turn the table to like getting specific questions about the journey, because I know like people might be stuck on different points of this. And so I would love to address those specific points. But I think at a high level, I hope this kind of provided some clarity kind of on what our journey was like as like Muslim entrepreneurs. And so we would love to ask any.
I mean, just to add one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, was talking about, right, we wanted to avoid, getting loans, like getting into that method, but we also wanted to avoid giving up our own equity. That's something, for us, it's personal preference, and we want to keep as much equity to ourselves as possible. We've built this since day one. We don't want to dilute our shares, basically. So that's as well, like we want to find any other alternative possible to, and like it's probably, some people would say like, oh, there's no way you could get, like $70,000 without giving up any equity or getting into debt. Like it's definitely, we found alternatives to get that. So definitely don't feel like you have to choose either or. There's other options out there.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong, by the way, with getting like an actual like investment, of course, like for example, interest free, right? At like a later stage, but especially in the very beginning, like besides like Islamic value, just in terms of like a business, like a strategic, like actual like point is to kind of keep as much ownership in the beginning as possible, and kind of to like compensate for the attributes that would require you to like go get that funding. And kind of like do it on your own and take initiative. And then obviously when the time comes, like even for us, we definitely know we're gonna have to give equity out soon, but the more you keep in the beginning is valuable a lot. And so yeah, I think let's see. Oh, I think we're getting questions in the chat. One second, let me see that. Okay. So there's a question, I'll read it out loud in case you guys don't see it. It's how do you know an idea is a good idea, and how do you validate it? So I think that's a very good question, and I think that that question is initially it's kind of like the make or break factor that people have to basically like overcome before they actually start something. I think there's multiple there's a process to kind of evaluating whether or not an idea is good. I think the first one is the first one is just like seeing if there's like enough demand for an idea. And so what you can do is you can kind of again like let's say you have an idea. For us it was like a services idea, right? We basically what we first did was we asked a lot of people in our like friend groups and our family groups and did some research on is there a need for basically finding a person that can maybe like mow your lawn, or a person that can tutor your son, right? And that will give you like the initial like spark of whether or not this idea is even needed, right? In our case it was heavily needed. And so that kind of validated point one. But the second point is sometimes your idea may not be something completely new or unique. And so the question here is that, is your idea going to provide additional value that surpasses a specific competitor? And if it will provide a value, is it significant enough value that will lure customers over to you and also prevent another competitor from actually pursuing that avenue, right? And so that's the second question that you want to ask yourself if it's not unique. In our case, what we had to do is we basically downloaded over 30 apps, every single possible competitor, and we created like a chart of every single pro and con they had. And what we noticed was there were a lot of themes of cons that they had and specific business models that they had, which wasn't really easy for them to change just like that. And once we kind of aggregated that data together, the competitor analysis and also basically just customer need, we deemed that our approach to this problem was something that is worth pursuing. And the way we validated it was through the cheap way of validating it was just to get a lot of customer surveys. So we rolled out different surveys. We spent some money getting ads. But the final validation was actually creating an MVP that we had people basically check out. And Marwan, if you want to add something to that, feel free.
No, like as you said, the number one thing is just going to be always look at it from the customer point of view. We did a lot of research to come up with the conclusions we did. So yeah, just do industry analysis, competitor analysis, and then of course look at what value you would add to customers. All right, I'll answer the next question.
Okay.
So next question I saw is like, why is it important to keep as much equity as possible in the initial stages? So, when you first start off, if you were to, when you start any company that starts up in the very beginning, its total valuation, is at its lowest point because it really just started, right? As Kadama, as we grow over the 4 years, not to put like actual quantifiable values right now, but our values, way higher. It's way higher than what it was, years ago. And if we were to give up equity back then, we would have lost on all that additional value. Right now, we haven't given up anything. So our value, like if we were to give up equity today, we'd be getting much more in return than if we were to have given it away 4 years ago, if that makes sense. Same thing as the longer we keep it, the more we grow without giving up equity, like the much more value we get to keep for ourselves. So, if you basically want to exhaust all possible options before you go through the equity route. And the equity route itself isn't even, it's not even as easy as like, oh, I'll easily just find a buyer in the first place. Like you'll have to convince someone that you are valuable, that and you're gonna have to do a lot before that to even get to this point, basically.
Yep. I guess I'll follow up with the next question, but just I'm not sure if you mentioned the word. There's actually a terminology for what Marwan was explaining. It's called like bootstrapping your company, and so it's like a common thing that people do, basically in the initial part of their journey.
Yeah, like bootstrapping is just funding yourself, which is what we did.
Okay. So this next question is a really good question, but it's a bit long. I'll start off with the first half of it and then follow up based on that. So the question is like, what resources would you recommend for us if we already graduated from school? Like, and they mentioned like incubators, competitions, or just like other ways of getting funding for free. Okay, so graduate from school. So the first thing you should do is I think first just like explore the programs that your school offered, a lot of the times schools offer their alumni and students a lot of like additional basically programs or abilities for them to basically, support their business, whether it's in the form of financial support or basically just like mentorship. So I think that would be the number one thing to pursue. If for some reason your school or the school you're affiliated with that you graduate from has nothing available for you as a student or alumni, I think you should basically see if other members of your team are in a similar situation, or if a person that you're trying to bring onto your team is affiliated with such school. So that's kind of number one, to just basically exhaust the resources you can get from your school. Let's see. Marwan, do you want to touch a little bit more on the competitions part? Because Marwan was Marwan basically was mostly in charge of like the competitions and getting us in and actually the process of that.
So wait, just so I understand the question, it's like what
Yeah, so the question is like, what recommendations do we have for basically getting into such competitions, finding them, and like kind of like being able to land something out of them?
Right. So there's actually tons of, the competitions we participated in most of them have been local, but there was one competition we participated hosted by Princeton University, which wasn't local. And, there's tons out there. Like we've applied to many. I applied to one from Rice University, and like sometimes they have a rule where just need to have one member of your team be a student. So it is kind of a loophole. Add someone to your team who is a student.
Yeah.
Like you got to do what you have to do, honestly.
Like you can literally add an intern or something for like the summer who goes to that school, compensate them, do whatever you want, and then that's gonna get you in. So like, that's an option as well.
Yeah, and the focus on a lot of these competitions is like a business plan. They want to see, it's not necessarily about, you have to know and like talk about, if you're only focused on like the product, like there's much more to the product. Like, if you in these competitions, because it's an investment, but you're not giving up any equity. They're just giving you free money, but they're very selective with who they give that money to, right? They only give money to companies that they believe will be successful in the future. So you have to prove that to them. So make sure when you do get into these competitions, when you do write the initial business plans and all that, make sure you have all your bases covered. You've analyzed your competitors, you have a marketing plan, your product, you make yourself stand out. You have your unique competitive advantages. All that stuff is very critical. Have financial future projections, your business model, like all that you got to have covered. But there's so many resources out there. Just literally go on Google, look up a business plan competitions. You'll find a bunch hosted by different universities, different programs. And you're like, we've applied to a bunch and we got rejected for most of them. I mean, that's just how it is. But you only need just like that one competition to accept you. You go through it, you win. And, that's what happened to us. And one thing we noticed, after your first success, it gets much, much easier. Like after we went through the Jones Foster Accelerator, the next competition, it was a breeze for us. Like it was much easier to do. We got, we won $10,000 and like, it was just much easier for us just from that first experience. Once you break into that environment, things will be much smoother.
Yeah, and so I guess just to kind of give more of the insight that I think you're looking for as a person kind of like pursuing resources in the beginning, how do you actually like get your foot even inside of that door? There's two things here. There's obviously the acquiring, I guess, like the resource or even discovering it, and there's actually standing out once you've discovered it and you want to apply. And so our mechanism or like our like kind of strategy to kind of like figure out like all these different like resources was to literally create like a spreadsheet with like 3 rows. So number one is like, what is the actual like prize? What's the benefit of this? The second one was like the eligibility, and the third one was like the name of that competition or program, whatever it is. And we went on Google and we spent like hours and days just like searching keywords, bouncing between different accelerators, different programs, just trying to search up like college student startup funding and stuff like that. And we literally just exhausted our researchers until we created a list of, you know, like 20 accelerators and then like 20 to 30 like competitions. And like Marwan said, when you read the requirements, there's most of the time there's always going to be like that one requirement that scares you, and basically kind of prevents you from applying, whether it's like an affiliation or maybe a certain level of traction or something. And a lot of the times you can kind of like circumvent them, like in obviously a legitimate manner, like exploring new team members, or also, for example, if certain traction, obviously keeping note, and basically kind of like, sometimes you can't circumvent them immediately, you can work towards them. Like, for example, if you need a specific MVP, but just keep those in mind, keep that list down, and kind of create goals and basically create schedules based on those specific eligibility requirements. Kind of create a timeline with milestones that you have to meet in order to meet those things. And so, for example, like the Jones Foster Accelerator, if we had applied to it a year before, we would not have been eligible. And so if we had seen the opportunity 1 year before, we would have looked at their eligibility and kind of created a roadmap for us to meet in order to be eligible for that program. And so that's kind of the discovery mechanism that you can use to find all those options. The second option, the second part of this process is actually standing out, which Marwan talked about. And the primary thing here is the product and then the business structure. Obviously, you'd want to do a lot of research on different business plans, whether they're your competitors or just inside of your industry, and kind of see what you can do to stand out. And also consider the other people applying. If it's other students, how can you stand out from other students? And make it so that when a person reads those, the business plan and also sees your product, they're like, okay, wow, that team is scheduled for success. What they have here is outstanding, and that I know that if I give them a certain amount of funding, they will use it wisely, right? And so keeping those two things in mind, I think, are the two key approaches that you want to take if you're trying to land an incubator competition or something that's going to provide you with that funding. And again, most of the time, school-based incubators and competitions will give you free funding. And if it's not free funding, they'll probably take something minor from you, like a small amount of your company. But they're usually always, in terms of the benefit that you get in terms of like resources, mentorship, and actually growth, in combination with the financial basically benefit together, it usually is much better than default alternatives out there.
All right, let's see. I think there was one more question. How do you run a business interest-free? Do you have to turn down investments that use interest? Do you get investments without interest? So again, so far we haven't been put in that position, I guess, for, we've never had like investor approaches, like something with some type of loan deal or anything like that. So far, and everything we've done so far has just been through, equity, non-equity investments and no loan investments, just straight cash. But it is very tough, and we understand that. Like, we're aware that the system we live in now, like, even if you do try to go the regular equity route, maybe some investors do have their dealings in debt and in loans, in bonds or whatever it is. So it is definitely something very difficult. But we don't believe we have to choose between our religion and our company's success. So far we've proved that, we've proven that we can do it, and we don't intend to give up our values, because we know we don't have to do that for Kadama to be successful.
Yeah. Marwan, were you done with the question?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just to conclude, like, yeah, if we as much as we can, we will avoid putting ourselves in that position where we ever need to be in that situation.
Okay. There's a new question, but I realized that the question from Shakir, I kind of only answered half of it. So the other half he asked was like, we validated our idea. It's there. We know that this idea is going to be successful. The only bottleneck now is like, how do we actually get this developed? How do we get the design? And in the beginning, obviously it may not, getting an internship or finding a source of income usually is not immediate. Sometimes you have to work towards it. But there's going to be a time period where you're going to have to kind of like wait for something. And I think in those time periods, you don't want to strictly just wait. You want to be doing something that's providing value to the idea of the company or startup. In that case, for example, for this specific thing, if you're not a software designer, if you're not a software engineer, if you're not a designer, there's nothing wrong with actually exploring that and learning and actually maybe trying to create designs on your own, even if they're going to turn out completely ugly. Like if we showed you our initial designs of our initial designs of Kadama were like terrible. We had zero design experience, and there's nothing wrong with that, because what that will show to competitions and people that you're applying to is that you're able to take the initiative and compensate for a lacking skill. And again, there's always going to be the hard period in the beginning where you have to learn something from scratch. There's people who have degrees, but with hard work, you will be able to create something that's presentable that will help you in the basically long term. For example, Marwan's expertise is business, but Marwan, like when he came into the startup, we were all at the same page. Like I guess little design experience, little software experience, but at the end of like the journey where we are today, Marwan has been super involved in design, super involved in software, and he's literally able to speak as if he's kind of been in that industry for some time. And what that did was it grew his skill set and allows Marwan to contribute to different designs and different engineering aspects of our company, which is super beneficial because we no longer have to wait for somebody to come in and do that role. We don't have to wait for like financing to support that role. He's able to compensate because he expanded his skill set. And so again, and same thing for me, like with like marketing and business, because with a startup, the goal here is to kind of bring in as little people as possible in the beginning, but bring in people with potential to grow in multiple avenues. Because in a startup, it's not like a company where you focus only on one thing. You kind of have to be involved with everything. And so I would definitely encourage to kind of do some learning and also create some initial mock-ups on your own, even if they're ugly. That's completely fine. As long as the flow is there, you'll be able to leverage that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, and I know ugly mock-ups very well.
Yeah, like I don't know if I could probably toss in here an article that shows you like kind of like our designs over the past like 2 years. It's pretty crazy how much it changed.
Yeah. Okay, I see another question. So just to read out loud. Okay, so you're saying that feel free to just give your opinions, but I noticed that bringing a software-based service to the market is a bit easier from physical products. So do you think developing a physical product that is specific to the health industry is something an undergraduate student is able to take on, or is it more like a master's degree project? So I don't know if I'd personally say it's necessarily easier. It is definitely different, but there's like, me personally, what I went through, when I went through learning, when I got my business degree, everything we learned about was from that how you would create a physical product, basically. Like the entire market right now, it's better designed. It is, in my opinion, I think it might even be easier to bring in there's some pros and cons. Some stuff is physical products. It's a bit easier to convince, let's say, an investor, for example, like, hey, this would be a good idea, right? It's easier, you'd have your own supply chain. You would have, it's easier. You can measure your costs of goods, how much it would cost to produce a product, how much you'd sell it for. It's a lot more organized, and it's a lot more traditional. Something that's been done for decades. Software, relatively speaking, is somewhat new, especially the type, us coming in as a platform specifically. Definitely something relatively new and something that has its own unique challenges. But I definitely don't think it's something that should not be discouraged at all. Like it has its own different challenges, but also has its own unique resources you can take advantage of. So even as an undergraduate student, like we competed against, Amin and I, we were actually one of the fewer software starters. Like we were mostly competing against physical products, and these physical products were doing just as well as we were, and some even better. So yeah, no, definitely. And like, especially the health industry, like we were, what was the company called? Nano Dropper. It's this company's gotten millions of dollars in funding. It's a health company done by UW master students, I believe, University of Washington master students, and they're doing amazing. So definitely, it is a bit easier in some aspects, but harder in others. So yeah, I don't think it's one is necessarily easier than the other. It's just different. I don't know. I mean, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, again, it's a bit challenging for me to kind of speak more on behalf of like a product, physical product, because it's kind of a whole different like operation, like structure. But I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
I think what you mentioned was a good like high level explanation.
yeah, again, from a business standpoint, it is easier in my opinion because it's something that has already had its structure established for like many decades now, and there's a lot of resources for it. Like for, you know, I had to, even though I went to business school, like the way, for example, finances are done for a platform like us is nothing I learned. Like I had to learn completely different resources, and it was a whole process. A standard product, something you make, you know, physical product is already very well established.
Yeah. And basically, just like as like a high level connecting theme between all the questions is that like in the beginning, it's always going to be hard to do anything. Just like taking a class, starting a job, but the first 2 to 3 months, honestly, should never be like, okay, I'm going to actually start building this. Unless obviously you already have all that experience and you've kind of done all the validation. Usually the first 3 months should be like a lot of ideas and also kind of like figuring out as a team what you are great at and what you may need work at and what you like, you know, need to compensate for. Um, and so, yeah, again, if it was like a software company, and that's because like our journey, so it's easy to relate to it. It's figure out what you're missing and kind of maybe try to learn and get started and get ahead of the game on those specific subjects, so that when the time comes, you'll be able to like progress. And there's not, and this is, you basically also you'll be able to reduce like wasted time if you're actually learning, because in the future, if you do bring somebody in and you've done all that research to understand the product, now you're going to be a much better and stronger leader because you kind of know the vision and you kind of also will be able to provide assistance. And so there's literally never, nothing wrong with learning something new, even if you may think it's not going to be applicable in the future. What we have found is that anything we learned in the beginning has always came back and helped us in the long term.
Was that the last question?
Yes, I think that is the last question.
Okay.
Okay, Marwan said,
Eh,
I mean, not Marwan, sorry, Mohammed was like, we'll give a minute in case there's any last questions.
Okay. And yeah, if you guys want to ask questions later on, feel free to hit us up. You can DM us on Instagram or email us or anything like that. We'll be glad to help.
If you guys want to share your contact information, I can share that on our Slack and with our attendees.
Okay, is there anything in particular you're looking for, or just like a social
Whatever
media?
you'd like, your email or.
Okay, here's, I send my email in case there's questions.
Oh, we got a question. Are you guys scaling, looking to expand now? Yeah, so right now we're actually in the process of launching like a massive update to our app, and we're going to be running, you know, we're going to be running huge marketing campaigns across the country. We've already been growing pretty fast right now, but like this summer, like we're hoping to like really kick it off. And yeah, like the situation right now with the virus and all that has definitely changed the landscape right now. You know, we provide both in-person and online tutoring. You know, obviously the in-person stuff has been hindered a bit, which is now why we put all our focus on online tutoring, and that's actually been doing extremely well for us.
Yeah, also an advantage, like it's so much easier now to scale nationwide. And so something we've been doing, like we've also started working on bringing like a platform as well, so people can access our platform mobile or from the website. And so yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. I think COVID-19 is a very unfortunate situation, but I think it's going to change kind of like the business landscape a lot, and it's going to eat for people who are locally based, or they're going to try to find avenues to actually have a presence online, because it's kind of like a testament, like in the future something could happen where everything's going to shift online. And for online businesses, as you guys have seen, they're probably like they're flourishing, like Zoom and stuff like that. And so we came in like right after the accelerator, ready to basically excel in the in-person tutoring, and literally within a month our entire like our plan shifted to strictly online. So we basically redeveloped a lot of our features, and our technology kind of just completely changed. Marwan, so there's a question. It's like, how do you protect yourself against liability? I think you'd be able to give a great answer for that.
Okay, so in liability, let's say if, okay, like first thing, first and foremost, hopefully, like if you guys are doing anything, by the way, like always make sure register as an actual company. So if you do get sued or whatever, you're not putting your own personal liability at risk, because if you aren't registered, you get sued, then your own personal assets are at risk. So definitely make sure you have that separation between business and personal. And I guess after, like, we designed our, as a platform, obviously there are risks that can happen, but we worked with a lawyer to make sure our terms of service was, very strong and up to date, like that there are no loopholes. Anything that happens, we're protected because our customers have agreed to our terms of service, our privacy policy. So through that, and also like if we do need any help, we protect ourselves from liability. We do have the funds to basically get a lawyer to help us.
Yeah, and obviously we try to compensate for that with like our features by providing like ratings and reviews and stuff like that. And we always we give them tips in the apps, like to say, try to do this and this just to be safe and stuff. But like,
yeah, obviously first and foremost is to try to not even get yourself in the position where your liability is at risk. So as Amin said, we do our best to avoid that ever to be a situation in the first place. And we got another question saying, how did we find a mentor? So we got, I mentioned our big panel of mentors we got through the Jones Foster Accelerator. But before that, I guess our first mentor would be my dad personally. And you should always, in the very beginning, it's hard. Like you can't just like something you're going to find like, a professional mentor or whatever. It's difficult. So always what we did is like first look around, who's your family and friend circle, basically, who's in your community. My dad personally, he's worked at companies like Microsoft, in very high positions. So he has experience in, he's very well experienced in this type of stuff. So and obviously since he's my dad, he was obviously willing to help us. So, that was our initial starting point. Always look for that, basically those, because they're willing to help you, and, it's just as valuable.
Yeah, like leverage your network as well. Like obviously not everybody in their family may be an expert in a specific field that they're trying to get into, but if there's no one in your family, you can leverage your network. Like for example, we also my previous coworker was somebody who he's never worked in startups, but his opinion really it had a lot of value. And he was really special in terms of like assessing different situations, and so we brought him in a few times to kind of like assess things. And obviously, as you grow, you're gonna naturally find yourself connecting with other people through the competition and stuff like that you can bring in. And there's another question that asked, how do you find team members? And so, okay, so I guess for us, there's I guess two different stories if you're by yourself versus like if you kind of like for us, like me and Marwan kind of came up with the idea together. And so it was us two, and then that's when we kind of branched off to other people. But the number one thing to do when you're trying to find people is kind of like assess those who have compensating skills to yours. Like for example, I'm like the software person, like and like kind of the vision, kind of like design product focused. Marwan had the business and financial focus, operations focus, right? So when we first met up, it was like an immediate green check that, okay, he'll basically lead this part of the company, I'll lead this part of the company. And so that based on both ends, we knew it was like a very strong and mutual collaboration. But as we brought in more people, we kind of like we leverage our network, like friends, family, and just the benefit of leveraging your network is you kind of already know where that person stands. Like their work ethic, their expertise, and so it's really easy to kind of be like, yo, like you're great at this, and this. I would love to have you in the company. The challenging part becomes when you basically exhausted your network and you're trying to branch off from that. We actually recently had to bring in designers. And we had to bring in web developer interns and stuff like that. And so what we did was we posted on basically college chats, like for us, University of Washington class of 2020. We say, hey, we're college students and we're trying to do this. And we got, obviously, a lot of students want experience, they'll reach out. You can have like an interview process set up. That's exactly what we did. We had an interview this morning. And so that's how you kind of can bring in student people, student support. If you're looking to bring in people who are already in the industry, that's where it might be a challenge, because usually they have, we found it, the easiest type of people to bring in is other students, just because, we're kind of.
And they are, they are very, you can definitely find, they are very passionate. They're very smart.
Exactly.
And they really want to, like, a lot of students really want, like in the business school I attended, there's like a mixer every month where students who are interested in entrepreneurship come together, and that's how a lot of the teams were formed. And a lot of really, really successful startups have come out of the University of Washington because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, just like experience, while experience is very useful, I think the biggest thing that we've seen so far is for example, some of our best interns were people who came in with little experience, but they had the motivation, they had the drive to basically compensate for that experience with learning. And so they learn fast, they pivot fast, and they grow. And by the end of the internship, it seemed like they've been doing this thing for years. And those are usually the best people to bring on your team, because at the end of the day with a startup, you need that versatile like mentality. And you're usually never going to find somebody who knows everything. It's always going to be like they're good at one thing, but if they're able to learn fast and pick up other things, then there's so much benefit when it comes to the greater picture of your business. And those are the kind of type of people we like to bring in. So we like to assess how they think. Are they able to pivot in case something changes? And so definitely those are some key characteristics to look for when you're trying to bring in people. And if we didn't like highlight a specific part of your question, feel free to, like, I guess, post another thing in the chat so we can elaborate in a certain aspect, because a lot of these are kind of like high level.
We got another question, I think. What trait was it? Oh, what trait is most important for being an entrepreneur? Okay, so I this is a bit subjective. I mean, might have his own personal opinion, but for me, it might sound a little cliche, but honestly, it is hard work. Like, there's really, really, really no substitute for that. Having that and hard work, consistency as well. Because here's a story. Right after we came up with the idea for Kadama, when Amin and I were walking out of the gyro shop, we were at the parking lot, and Amin was walking to his car, and I tell Amin, wait. And I was like, and turned around and I said, this better not be just, we're saying this, we came up with this idea, we're just going to let it go. Like, it's a lot of people like start to like, oh, I'm going to go learn guitar. Then they don't do it. Like it's a very common thing people our age do. They make these grand plans and, whatever, and then nothing happens. I said, are we going to make this happen? I don't want this to be a joke. I don't want to brush this off. I don't want to forget it. Are we going to make this happen? And he said yes. And like, I knew since then, we basically never like let our foot off the pedal. Like, we've been consistent. We've been very hard work. We've been very driven. And that's what allowed us to get to this point. And that there's really no other way. People put limitations on themselves saying, well, I don't have the funding. I don't have the right team members. I don't have this. I don't have this. We encountered all those same problems, yet somehow we found a way through. Why? Because we were that persistent. We never let any excuse stop us from achieving our goals. And we're not going to let that stop us from achieving our future success.
Oh, okay, wait, hold up. We just got a bunch of questions. Okay, I'll focus on like the incentive, I guess, question about, so regarding team members in the very initial stages, when you can't pay anyone, what incentive can you provide, especially when you need additional hands to help build? In the very beginning, if even for us, initially it's going to be hard to provide like certain compensation, and so a a lot of the time when you create like your job roles and stuff like that, if you're targeting in specific students and you explain to them that you're a startup, you're still new, I think they're kind of open to the idea. They understand where you're coming from. And so also a lot of the time thing here is a lot, like they kind of care more about the experience than the compensation. Because they're usually trying to build their resumes and stuff like that. Like if they come do like 3 months with you in the summer, what they're trying to actually achieve from this is landing like the next internship for the following summer. And so compensation could be pretty low. It could be like project based. Like for example, you can be like, okay, we'll give you, like we need this done. Maybe we can have a $300 compensation. But the goal here is that for us to learn, and obviously in addition to getting that experience and resume boost, we will work with you to like help teach you certain things. We will kind of mentor you and stuff that you may not be very well versed in, right? And so in that summer, maybe like let's say they don't have a job, and this just serves as a great opportunity for them to learn. They're demonstrating their skills, they're implementing their skills, and they're learning. So that most of the time is actually basically, it was like the deal breaker. And even with no compensation, you'll still get some amazing people. We've had great people join our team with that mechanism. And so I think there's a lot of students, and I think this avenue is going to be sufficient usually for a company. And so I don't think there's need for you to actually go out and create like Indeed listings and stuff like that, because those college group chats, you're always going to get demand based on how you structure your position.
Okay, I'll answer the next question. So this question is about the chicken and egg problem. So we definitely experience this as well. It's like, well, how are you gonna, you need to convince investors to give you funding, but they want to see something finished before they give you funding. So like you're just stuck like, okay, well, what do you do now? So investors, what we found out from talking to many investors, what they want to see is, proof that, what you're like, is your thing in demand first off? Like, is there demand for your product, right? One way to do that is actually like making the product and getting actual traction, but another way is just doing research, right? If you ask do a survey of 1,000 people, right? That's a value, right? Like that research is something extremely valuable, and investors take that very seriously. And also there's other ways, I guess you don't, for example, like if you were building an app, but you didn't have money to actually build the entire app, you don't need to actually build an app launch on the app store. At least make frames, make interactive frames or something. There are programs like, online that are easy to use, like design programs. You can like at least come up with the business model, the concept, the flow. And, through that and doing all that, like I believe that would be enough to convince investors at least to give you that starting amount to create your initial product. But yeah, you can create initial mock-ups without having to create an entire full-blown app. And that's if you wanted to get investors at first. But we throughout our talk, we talked about other ways that don't involve getting investors, whether you have to work another job or, find these competitions to apply for. There are other avenues you can take.
Yeah. Like Marwan said, there's actually like literally you can use software where you can literally like draw squares and circles and stuff like that, turn it into like a user interface and have it actually animate from page to page without writing a single line of code. That's literally enough for you to be able to get all your feedback and demonstrate your app. And if like an investor saw that, he'll be like, okay, well, obviously they couldn't actually develop it because they're not software engineers, but they literally did everything else, which is kind of like the meat and bone. So then they'll be like, okay, well, I'll give them funding and I'll work with them to maybe find the right developer to actually build it. And so that's a huge step forward. You have to do something that stands out, like again, like competence for something when in the beginning. There's a second question here where Mohsen is asking, in the early stages when you're bringing people into your company, are they kind of on the equal playing field with you, or are they kind of like an employee employer type situation? So this is my opinion. My opinion from the very start is like in the very start, the people you want to bring in are kind of the people you want to have like for the duration of the company, like basically forever. Because at the very beginning, you're defining the different aspects of your company, and you want those people to kind of like serve as like the leadership and the vision behind everything in the future, right? And so if the person you're bringing in may be somebody you're still trying to assess, maybe you have no idea whether or not they can actually like take on this role, then in the very beginning, you can kind of bring them and be like, hey, I need your help for maybe 3 months and we'll see how that goes. And then if that works well, 6 months, and then maybe ask them, like, you want to join me and be kind of like on the same playing field. And a lot of time in the very beginning, I guess, since there's no salary, it's usually like equity based. So like, okay, in the big, we will like, I'll give you some portion of my company. Like you'll have like 25%, you'll have 50%. And yeah, so that's my opinion. In the very beginning, you want to bring in people with the mentality that you're gonna like keep them on. Once you kind of establish that group, moving forward, you can bring people for like temporary like projects and stuff like that. For us, there's never been an employee-employee relationship. It's usually like we're a big family, like we're a team, we work together. It's never felt like, oh, like this guy's my boss. It's always been like we learn from each other. We're always learning and very involved with each other's works. I guess the only time where we brought in somebody, not for the intention of having them join us forever, is like the contractors that built our first version of the app, and that was it was like the plan was just to bring them in, have them develop the product, and we take it and move on from there.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming. Thanks for all those questions. They're really great questions, and thanks Marwan and Amin for that great talk. It was very informative. Alhamdulillah. All right. Next up, we have a community event coming later today, and tomorrow we have a couple talks. Check in on our Slack for more information about the rest of our events. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks again for the speakers. Assalamu alaikum.